Okay, so let's try to make a start. So welcome to this session where we will discuss basically the EIC Accelerator blended finance. And we have here two heavyweight women in the field of innovation. I have Monica Lessel, who is the Vice President, Head of Corporate Innovation, R&D and Societal Engagement at Bayer AG. You're Executive Director of the Bayer Foundation as well. And you're the person behind Bayer's innovation agenda. So I guess innovation is no surprise to you. You were involved until 2013 in the external innovation therapeutics function at Bayer Healthcare in Berlin, where you designed the therapeutic partnering strategies and established a number of novel innovative partnership models with academia, biotech, and venture capital. Very impressive. And I see that prior to this, you worked 8 years as a scientist and lab head of the research laboratories of Schering AG, correct? Yes.
That's right.
Okay, so we are indeed very well informed. And last but not least, and this is actually why probably we looked at your profile with great interest in the context of this panel, is that you are currently a jury member for the European Innovation Council, COLS. One of them is about to close on the 9th of October, and of course we will be very happy to hear your feedback on that operation, since this is the subject of this panel. And now I turn to you, Anita Krohn-Troset, correct?
Very good.
Yeah. You see, I've done some research on the Norwegian aspect of it. So you're a Norwegian business executive, writer, and former CEO of Innovation Norway, who is actually one of our partners in the context of the EIC implementation. Innovation Norway is one of the Norwegian government's most important instrument for innovation and development of Norwegian enterprises and industry. I understand you have more than 20 years of experience with the private and public sector. You were the first female managing director of Hewlett-Packard Norway. And in the past years, you have received several awards, including Best Female Leader in the ICT industry in Norway. You were one of the top 20 women in business in Northern Europe, correct? And the top 50 most inspiring women in Europe tech, and is on the radar of emerging thinkers globally by Thinkers 50 in 2018. So all this is very impressive. More recently, you have joined us as a member of the European Innovation Advisory Board in the pilot form that we just redesigned. So again, congratulations of this and for the role that this very important body is going to play to shepherd for us the EIC. So as most of you, or at least a number of you know, we have reshaped the EIC under the enhanced pilot in 2019. This enhanced pilot is now in implementation with the first call for blended finance that is expiring in a few days. And of course, this is for us quite a major, how can I say that, milestone in the development of the European Innovation Council. Of course, the negotiation on Horizon Europe have closed for the moment. They will resume on the budget side shortly after the confirmation of the Commission. But of course, the EIC pilot, in particular with the introduction of blended finance, is very important for us to kickstart that discussion. We have been touring, of course, all the member states and associated countries, almost all of them, including Norway, where I had the pleasure to be myself there. I was not in Berlin. Other colleagues did that. But we have had the privilege to gather a lot of return feedback, not only from institutional partners like Innovation Norway, but also from companies, large corporates, potential startups and applicants. And of course, this gives us, I would say, a feeling of gathering momentum around what we are trying to do with blended finance under the EIC Accelerator. But let me turn to you, Monica, first, with your experience as an EIC jury member. What do you think this instrument is providing? Where are the obstacles for European community to get funding? Are we answering that question in a way by the EIC?
Right. So first of all, I would say it's really an honor to be a member of the jury of the European Innovation Council, because it offers the opportunity to really see exciting young startups and also to get to know really innovative and new ideas. And I think this new instrument kind of fills a gap, because what is really important is how can these young startups scale as fast as possible. And there, on one hand, I mean, we have the financing through the normal funding, but now with the new instrument, we also have the opportunity to get equity. And this really allows then for these startups who have really disruptive ideas to be faster. And this is, I think, what is it all about, and I think where I see also obstacles. I think we are not fast enough in Europe to scale our startups and our innovative SMEs. It just takes too long. It's quite difficult to get access to finance, and laborious to get there, because quite often there is not so much willingness to take risks. And I think this is another element. On one hand, providing equity, but also having the willingness to take risks and to join then forces with others. So I think this is an important gap which the instrument can fill here.
Thank you. Anita, if I turn to you, under your lead, Innovation Norway has become, I would say, quite a major partner of the EU programs, Horizon 2020, and Norwegian companies have become highly successful at using the opportunities of financing under the different programs, in particular the SME instrument, which was, to a certain extent, the ancestor of the EIC as it is now designed for the EIC pilot. And Norway is clearly one of the main contributors to innovation in Europe. It is considered a high innovator. How do you see the added value that these programs offer, especially for a high innovator country that is an associated country? Does it make sense for you to send your companies to apply to an EU program such as Horizon 2020 and the EIC? Or are you trying more to keep your best to yourself, your best companies to yourself?
No, I must say, when I heard about this program a couple of years ago, and when I heard actually Moedas present this idea of how to kind of redefine a little bit how this setup is going to be, more connected to the private sector, more connected to the young innovators, and blending it with also private capital, I was thinking, is this really happening in EU? Because finally, I'd say EU is going to be very relevant for the coming generation who is actually going to build the new industries. So I think the timing of EU implementing these programs, redefining, this is the third time they redefine Horizon, and I'd say EU is quite innovative here compared to other states. So if you look at the sum of Europe is quite well positioned to what I call the sixth wave of innovation. So we were not the top-notch region when it comes to the fifth wave, which was about ICT and software. That, if you look at the big unicorns, they come from the States, USA, and Asia. And if you look at Europe in that perspective, we don't have the biggest ICT companies. But ICT is only one of the key enabling technologies that EU has defined. The other key enabling technologies are in the sixth wave. This is about deep technology, business to business, sustainability, green tech, complex industrial material design. This is what Europe is really good at. So I'm thinking that the, what you call a pendulum, is going to shift a little bit. And EU is, with these programs, positioning EU as a European hub to take a bigger lead into that transition. So in Norway, and my colleagues at Innovation Norway, we've been rooting for this ever since we heard about it, because we thought it was disruptive of being EU, if I can say so. We know you're going to meet a lot of questions about, is this going to happen? Is it possible? And I can only say, based on experience from Norway and other countries, yes, it can happen. It's possible to solve it. And the way that the EIC, we had our first board meeting, and I have to repeat again because the chairman of the board, he started the introduction. We are 22 people in the board, and he said, well, you have a license to misbehave. And I was like, am I in Brussels now? Did I hear this from a high-ranked university professor? I think there's a shift in the way you are positioning programs and EU relevance for the next generation. I'm sorry I'm so optimistic. I just really like it. You know, I think this is exactly what EU needs. What can I say? I believe in it.
Thank you, Anita, for your very kind words. Indeed, we're trying very hard to be innovative and to try to break, I would say, the mold of these EU programs. It's not easy. We are fighting a lot of internal battles in order to get there, but I think that indeed we are getting there progressively, but it's a joint effort. And indeed, the work you're doing in the board is essential to help us continue this job and to deepen it. But you said something very interesting about the next wave of innovation, and in particular how we relate to the ICT sector. The approach that we have followed under the EIC is very much bottom-up. And we have done that because we believe to a certain extent that the next wave of innovation is integrating ICT into many other sectors, and those innovations will happen in the intersection between different sectors. And we cannot continue thinking in terms of top-down approaches or in terms of topics, concentrating on one topic or one of the other, because it doesn't really make much sense anymore to approach it in that way. But maybe I can turn to you, Monica. Since you come very much from the health, pharma sector, do you think it applies to all sectors, or all sectors retained to a certain extent a certain sense of peculiarity, and therefore, for example, in the health sector that would necessarily work very well, we still have to be quite sensitive to the particularities of every sector in order for us, for the EIC, for example, to be relevant? What's been your experience in particular also as a jury member? Do you see a great deal of sector specialization still happening?
Yeah, I also firmly believe the future is really, it's at the intersection, the convergence of the areas. And I mean, people usually talk about the revolution in technology. Everybody talks about digital, but in the same time, we are experiencing a revolution in science. Yeah? We talk about stem cell technology. We talk about gene editing, modifying genes. Yeah? And the convergence of both is really what is an absolutely breakthrough. And we are talking, for example, about systems biology. We can design things going forward. And there is a lot of questions around it, but there are also a lot of opportunities. And just one example, I mean, I come from an industry, and we produce, among others, also chemicals. And the way we produce it is in one way traditional ways, but there are also now new ways. You can use bioprocessing and have completely can you get to more carbon neutral ways in production, and there we need also absolutely new technologies which are now coming up, which are in the field of systems biology, and I think this is really where you have this convergence of the different areas where I mean, Europe is absolutely well positioned, and I really 100% agree with you, Anita. This is where I see a huge opportunity for Europe. It's in the field of new technologies and sustainability. We can only achieve growth within planetary boundaries through innovation, and we need urgently this innovation. And I think there Europe can play a big role, and I also see this instrument as a wonderful opportunity to drive this forward.
You have a comment on that?
No, I think it's easy to look at the numbers and kind of lose the belief that can Europe even be close to creating the next generation big companies. I think we sometimes go blind on thinking that what defines the future is creating the new Facebook. I think it's about much more. Europe can create different platforms, but at least platforms, because the beauty, but also the challenge of Europe is the diversity. But if we can play on what makes us unique, we can learn from Silicon Valley when it comes to a culture of growth and capital. We can learn from Asia, but most of all, we can learn from all the different countries in Europe, because they are already delivering a diverse approach to it. So it's a very good place where we can do pilots and test things. But what we need is a common pan-European hub. So where we can, as a region, be much stronger, because we are 500 million people. We are going to compete with the Asian region with 4.4 billion people. And they have a very strong statement in China now. And I've been following China the past 5 years very closely in my former job. And I was meeting with the CTO of Alibaba, which is one of the largest platforms. And he said, if it was he or one of his colleagues, I don't remember exactly, but I don't forget the sentence. He said, China is going from made in China to invented in China. That is a huge power and mental shift also for the next generation Chinese people. And we also see a bigger cooperation between the Asian countries, while at the same time, we listened to Trump yesterday at UN saying he does not... Indeed. He's going the quite opposite direction. So the power structure of the big regions are in change, and Europe are in position to take a different role for the next 20 years than we've had for the past 20 years. And instruments like that involves not only professors and scientists in Europe, but the entrepreneurs in the garages, the people without an academic background. You know, this kind of way of involving in this platform and how you work with the triangle of both research, society, but also social entrepreneurship. I think if we can capitalize on the value of Europe, even though it's much more complex than the US, I would say, we have so many different languages and currencies and politics, it can be extremely strong and powerful. It's going to be really hard work, but that's why it's so important that we have, coming from EU, programs like this. And you've also managed to, you say it's bottom-up, yes it is, but you also set directions with missions. EU has done that before UN did it with the sustainability goals. The Horizon program had 7 societal challenges before the UN came with the SDGs. There is a culture in Europe to think about the society at large. We cannot lose that now, specifically not when we look at, if I can say the B word, Brexit, and if we look at the Trump, and yeah. So we need to be strong together now.
Yeah, I'll try to steer clear of the Brexit or Trump speech, for that matter, as well. In this discussion, I'll come back to you, because I have a question on how to, articulate better the national and the European, in particular in view of the ecosystems. And we had in the previous session a very good presentation on VC, and Francisco gave us, I would say, a very strong message on how the VC market can grow in Europe by better connecting with the national VCs, the national actors that seems to be too small to really be in a position to attract support for institutional investors somehow, and we need to find a way to bring them on board. But let me first turn to you, Monica, on this. Since you come from the private sector, a big company actually, you're not feeling nervous about the idea that the Commission will take direct equity stake in startups, in companies? And if not, why? Because, I mean, we are breaking quite a big taboo here. We are quite aware of it. And we are quite surprised by the lack of, I would say, reaction, hostile reaction, animosity towards this, where for many, many years, basically, it was the whole market approach that was dominating the discourse in Europe.
I would say that a lot of changed in the recent years, and it becomes more and more clear it's only possible through collaboration. Yeah, I mean, even a big company like Bayer, it's completely impossible to do everything alone. So we have partners. Be it startups, be it other corporates, be it CROs, and so on and so forth. So it's really clear there's no innovation without collaboration, and I think this is therefore. I mean, it's also a de-risking if you invest in a company and then this company is growing, and of course then it's a good opportunity to work together. And we actively seek for partnerships. So I think that's for us not a a disadvantage, I would rather say it's an advantage. And it's also is a quality check, of course, if the EU is investing. Of course, there has been a good due diligence and so on and so forth. It would be one sign that this is a promising organization. Yeah.
So you have no problem orienting, for example, startups in which you consider yourself to invest, to first come through the EIC to get, I would say, the label of excellence that this provides, but also the possibility of getting both a grant and an equity participation before it basically unlocks your participation as an investor in those ventures.
Yeah. Of course. And I also want to mention another aspect in terms of collaboration, because there might be also an opportunity for this program really to bring together all the entrepreneurs that they can work together and scale faster. Because another leg we have in Europe, I think it's not only finance, but it's entrepreneurs. And in the US or in other areas, you have, let's say, professional entrepreneurs. They start a company, they raise it and go to the next one, do the same thing. So they have a lot of experience. And I think this kind of profession is still lacking here in Europe. And maybe it's also worthwhile to think about it. How can we promote it? How can we support it? How can we, let's say, get some education in terms of entrepreneurship to foster this?
So to go back to you, Anita, and to the point on how we articulate better the national and the European, I think it's particularly salient, that question, when we are talking about the associated countries, but not only. It's also for the big European countries in Europe that also have very sophisticated programs of support to innovation. What should be the model? Should we aim at an EIC that is basically a network of national actors? Or should we try to reach out directly to startups through the various instruments, some of them being the EIC Accelerator, but some others, we saw them in the previous presentation, are reaching out through the stimulation of the VC market directly? Should we try to achieve a combination of both in order to try to basically hedge our bets and make sure that we don't leave any gaps? I mean, the advisory board is an attempt to bring those ecosystem voices close to us in order to refine the message and nuance the approach. What's your take on it? I mean, how should we approach this, well, I mean, we can say tension between the national and the European?
I think with an experimental mind. I think spending too much time trying to do research and figure out how can EU take less risk and minimize the risk, then we're going to lose what's happening. So I think, as I understand it, that we get ideas and we get suggestions on different programs and how to implement it. And that's the beauty of Europe. Let's try a pilot in one country and see how that works. And then let's try a second pilot in a third country, because the countries are so different. For example, we discussed in the board, there was a member there from Spain, and there's not a lot of private capital investments available, they say, for Spanish entrepreneurs. But I think the beauty of having a pool of European investors connected to EIC in a partnership, meaning that if a Spanish entrepreneur comes to one of these programs, it doesn't matter where the investor comes from. If it's Nordics or Germany, it doesn't matter. It's how do we capitalize on European ideas with European money? Because, for example, take Norway. We are a small country with 5.2 million people. We don't really have a big home market. We cannot succeed with our innovative growth companies that we, for example, have in medtech. 20 years ago, you'd see almost no medtech companies in Norway. The Norway health tech cluster, because that's how Norway works with SMEs, we have to work in clusters because we don't have one big company. I think Europe also needs to think clustering, not creating the one monster, but having strong clusters that can nurture both the big ones, the small ones, and also have a differentiate portfolio investment perspective. So what we see is that the Chinese are investing more in Norway now than in Sweden, because we are doing a lot in medtech. And we that's where we put the most of our research money, is in health. We have catalogs of data that are really interesting for Asia. These are data is gold. How do you capitalize on data? We have a cancer register in Norway that is highly valuable. What if these companies could connect to a set of European investors? Now they have to kind of try alone to make that connection. We do as much as we can at the national level, but if EU can take that umbrella hat, saying these are the environments, these are the angles and the focus of the different investor environment, that's going to be so good for us at the national level. We'll work with finding the best projects, but we need them to scale. Then we need to have EU as the one-stop shop for European investment capital.
Yeah, no, thank you for making this point, Anita. Actually, it is the approach, though we remain bottom-up at the level of the EIC Accelerator, it is, in view of the projects and the company will be selected to try to group them in portfolios and make sure that then we have indeed those connections, those network effect between the different projects or clusters of projects in order to indeed add value at European level. This is where the added value also of the EIC Accelerator could prove quite decisive in comparison to where we are today. But let me go back to your last point of the previous question, Monica, when you said it's not only capital that can be added, it's also expertise, and we lack the professional entrepreneurs that the US has nurtured over many waves of innovation. How can we try to resolve that issue? Are we going to, say we are right now under the EIC Accelerator trying to provide a lot of support for these soft skills for new entrepreneurs that are emerging, in particular from the research field. But do you have any, I would say, silver bullets, a great idea that you can apply to that? How can we resolve that lack of entrepreneurship expertise? I mean, we have some, but not maybe at the level of the number of startups that we have in Europe emerging.
Well, for sure, the silver bullet I may not have, but one aspect, if we look how we, at universities, I'm a scientist, and there was nothing about entrepreneurship in universities. We are working with Falling Walls together and on a program called Young Entrepreneurs in Science, where we really go and give young PhD students some support in thinking of, could I start a startup? What would it mean? Do I have an idea? How could I move this forward? Yeah? I think it's really instilling also this idea early on. And usually scientists have been pure science and nothing else. So, but I think it has to be open up and be much more flexible. And instilling this earlier on in academic development, I think would be a good way in fostering this whole development.
Yeah. If I can comment that, because usually, at least from the experience in Norway, the first contact point entrepreneurs take with Innovation Norway is for the first C, the capital, the money. But when we evaluate their experience, it's not the money that has meant the most, it's the other two C's. It's competence programs and it's connections. Mm-hmm. Those are more valuable than the money itself, because the connections brings you to clients and customers. And we have a lot of focus in Norway on, you have to focus on getting a pilot customer already when you are starting to developing technology. Because if you're going to be 100% publicly funded project, that brings the wrong signals, because you have to have focus on the user, on the end user, to make it relevant and to get market feedback as soon as possible in the process. So we need to combine the technology development with the market development. And this is a lack of skill that we can learn from America. They are really good at marketing and branding. In Europe, marketing and branding is kind of, okay, something people do, it's not worth it, the real stuff is science. But the times are gone when science itself speaks for itself. You have to fight for the attention and the relevance and the ambassadors to actually use it to make people buy it, then we have to respect that there are PhDs in marketing. There are PhDs in developing new value chains, because how do you go to the market and how do you set up different value chains, specifically for small European countries? How do you deal with the logistics to Asia? This is competence, business competence, that we're not best at in Europe. They are really good at it in the States and also in Asia, specifically on the logistics side on the platform. So this is also an underestimated competence in Europe that we should have at the same level. And you know, we give prizes for science. We should also give prizes for managing how to build businesses, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree with your last point indeed, Anita. Maybe we can turn now to the audience. Do you have any questions for our two panelists? Yes, I see one here.
Thank you. I would just have a short question. How can an interested investor in co-financing, in blending, contact and where to send his application? And what are the criteria for this equity investor that would be interested in order to be accepted as eligible? What is the procedure? Thank you.
Okay. It's not really for the two panelists. It's more of a kind of a how to apply type of question. So I'll take it if you don't mind. If indeed there is a startup or an SME that wants to apply and has already an investor foreseen, or that has already an investor in the company, not necessarily just foreseen, but also already in the company, that company may apply to the EIC Accelerator for grant plus equity and explain in the application that there is already an investor in, or that there is an investor ready to come if the de-risking that the grant and equity of the European Commission will provide happens. And of course, that will be a major element to take into consideration in the evaluation, in particular at the level of the second step of the evaluation, the face-to-face interview with the jury members, to evaluate whether indeed this is not only excellent science and technology that is being presented, but also I would say an added value in terms of the financing on the basis of what it would do in terms of enhancing the prospects of that company. So therefore, there is no, I would say, disqualification that will come from the fact that the investor is already in that company or is ready to come in if the de-risking in terms of grant and blended is actually happening. So you can do it basically prior in explaining in the application how this will be done. What, of course, will be done afterwards, after the companies are being selected, is that we will systematically connect to communities of investors, VCs that are, for example, those that the EIF supports through our mandate or other EU mandates, but also those that are basically those happening under national initiative, like the programs under Innovation Norway, to see to which extent those community of investors are ready to co-invest with us on the companies that we have already identified. So it's second step and a second opportunity for private investors or public investors actually to come in and co-invest with us. And here, in that context, you need, of course, to make yourself known if you're not yet known through the EIF and the EIB. But we can do that, I would say, after this panel, if you would like. Another question? Yes, Francisco.
So well, thank you very much for the talk. Very interesting. I heard Anita saying that a lot of the researchers or the scientists say that connections and I don't know what was the other C, but something related to that.
Competence. So capital, competence, connections. That's the magic.
And we have heard the same when we do direct investments. But the truth, when we invested in deep tech, for example, as investors, is that you can do as many pilot projects as you want in a corporation, but you need to have strong balance sheets for having those corporations integrate the solutions. because one of the things they will see when you get to the purchase department is your P&L and your balance sheet. So the companies need to be overcapitalized. I think that is a mistake that is normally seen in Europe because of that thought that, you know, the important thing is the product, the important thing is if I do it well, they will buy it. But then if you put yourself on the multinational side, on the corporate side, no one is going to take a risk. I would not take it if I had to do it, even if the product was fantastic, in a company that is not well funded. So it all comes down to, of course, you have to have the entrepreneurs, you have to have the people and the concept, but you need to have the funding. And that is the major difference. Recently, we invested in a company in Spain which was working with Telefónica because they were investors as well. They were owners, so they were willing to take the risk. In the very moment we got around with the US investors, they put in 25 million straight away, because without that you cannot go to the US. They will not. I mean, they will do some pilots with you, but that's it. And I think that's something we have to change as a concept. I don't know you have the same view or not.
If I can comment that, I completely agree with you. And it's not only an issue in Spain. I think it's an issue in a lot of the European countries. And this is also what differentiates the philosophy in the cases that are grown up in America, because the money that they bring in is so much bigger than all the different rounds that we are doing in Europe. And I think this is also one of the key reasons to why I believe in EIC, EIB, EIF, European Investment Fund, the bank, and the EIC programs. That cluster together needs to come and repair that level, because EU is not going to compete where private capital is already making a difference. We're exactly going to focus on these kind of situations where this is an issue, where there is no risk from the buying company, the risk is too high for you, the risk is too high for the private investors. These are the projects, at least we are looking for in Norway. And also understanding the different value chains of time to market in the different industries. From an ICT perspective, you can go from a scientist idea to a new company in 6 months. In health, in medicine, it can take up to 15 to 20 years. And understanding how those different innovation process is and what they need in a different level of capital needs also to be taken in, I forgot the word.
Account.
Take into account, yeah. So that there is, and I think that's probably why I really like what EU has started now. They don't believe in one solution thread over, top down from EU. They've really been listening, understanding the different needs from the different groups. They understand the complexity. Still, they're trying to create solutions that can nurture and help. And that's brave, because it's a setup for failure too. Because when you are moving into the industry of innovation, you are bound to fail and take risks. You know, we know that the ratio is not going to be different in Europe than it is in the States, where 70% of the companies the first 5 years is going to fail. Well, then Europe is going to learn from the 30% who does it differently. That's going to be the key for us. But we're also going to have to lose money. I don't think it's losing money. I think it's investment. Every big project that has been successful has tons of projects behind it with where you've lost money, even though we don't talk too much about it. I don't see it as a failure. I see it as important learning and investments.
Monica, you want to add something? No.
No, I'm fine.
Yes, question over there.
Yeah, hi, I'm Otto Brun from InnoSuisse. So our stakeholders in Switzerland are very excited about the EIC and this opportunity to really address this valley of death in growth stage and scaling up as well. But it seems that there are kind of two possible opportunities here. So one is addressing the fact that in Europe there's less venture capital funding overall in this kind of space. And another is the opportunity in deep tech, where Europe really has this opportunity to develop these technologies, but because they have a very complicated path to market, there's less funding for that because of the high risk profile. So perhaps my question to all three of you is, do you see the real target or priority here to co-invest and then kind of leverage up the capacity of European VCs? Or do you see it more as filling in this space of the really high-risk growth stage until VCs can see a kind of path to success and feel more comfortable entering into the investment? So is it more kind of filling in this space for VCs to come in later, or as a co-investment vehicle? Thank you very much.
So basically your question is whether we will co-invest subsequently or simultaneously, basically. That's more or less. And in terms of sectors, whether we'll be more on deep tech or more generally on all innovations. What do you think?
Well, I think it shouldn't be predefined what is the sector. It should be really what is kind of disruptive in terms of innovation. Yeah? And as I said previously, I think this convergence of science and technology is a very interesting field. Yeah, I mean, just to mention one of the companies we had it was about microfluidics and then production for a kind of cell therapy, which is revolutionizing the whole thing. Yeah, this is kind of the bottleneck, because if you want to do cell therapy, you right now have very complex procedures to prepare the cells, to cultivate the cells, where you have a lot of risks and until you give them back to the patient. And if you could do this in microfluidics, in nanoliter scale, this would, of course, make a step change. So this is just one example where, for example, I thought this is amazing if you can get this to the market. But the market needs it now, because the cell therapies are now in the market. So if it takes 20 years, then someone else will have done it. So the question is, how can we, these really bright guys who were presenting this, how could we help them to scale and get to the market as fast as possible? This would be just an example from my side, but I wouldn't predefine the financing in a certain sector. I think it should be extraordinary, where there's a real value we can create for the society in the end.
Yeah, I think we'd probably be doing both. In some cases, absolutely filling in the missing gap, but also in other cases where there are other rationales, be part of co-investing. And I think that's also important for EU in the investment portfolio, to have different projects with different risk perspectives, and also some of it, if it comes in cases from ICT, they have a lot shorter time to market than it is with other, like the stem cells, like you are talking about. But I think we also need a common culture shift in Europe, that yes, we are really excellent at delivering deep tech science and technology. We should also be having the same proud in capitalizing on that knowledge, trying to figure out, so from all this excellent research and scientists, I don't think we should turn scientists into businessmen. Let the scientists do what they're best at. But we need to bridge them with the business people, like they're doing at Harvard and MIT and Stanford. So we need to have less silo thinking in the educational system, because I think the idea of turning, I used to work for Simula in Norway. It's a research lab, basic research. And we were trying to define a model. How do you take an idea from a researcher's head out to become a patent or a company or a strategic alliance with the industry? They don't really have an interest in trying to explain anything in their research about how much money is going to be worth. It's not what drives them, you know? So then you have to set together a team that has that competence, and that they respect that competence, and let them do what they're best at in the different phases. So I think I think it's missed opportunities for us if we do not learn how to capitalize on that brilliant research that we are doing. And if we can speed up some of the time to the market from research from ID to IPO, if that's a concept, can we disrupt that way in Europe, that would be interesting. That's real. I mean, that's business innovation. It doesn't always have to be creating products. It can also be business models.
Absolutely.
No, thank you for these points of view. I think I agree. And just last point that I wanted to say to answer your question is that financial instruments conceived at EU level often fail because of their narrow, predefined focus. And I think we have learned from this experience over the years that we need to have those financial instruments relatively flexible in terms of their scope in order to really respond to the demand addressed to them, which is very difficult for us to anticipate when we are at the conception stage. Hence, here with the EIC, we have indeed an instrument that can do broadly both the elements that you brought to our attention, but I think we need really to take the pilot that now is unfolding as a real-world experiment to know exactly where the market sees the added value of that instrument and not try to predefine it first, because that is basically setting us up for failure if we do it in a manner that is too rigid. So let's indeed see the pilot play out, and then we'll see and learn from experience with, of course, the contribution from the board that will analyze this very, very closely, the results of the different calls, and of course the input that we'll continue to gather from industry on how we can make this even more relevant in terms of our contribution. But I guess we have exhausted more or less our time. So thank you very much for this very good discussion. Thank you very much to you, Monica, Anita, for your points of view, your perspectives. I think it's very, very comforting to us to see that we are indeed moving in the right direction. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.